Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Brian Zinchuk. I am the only reporter you're going to run into that used to build big-inch pipelines. I did that because I flunked out of mechanical engineering because I couldn't do calculus. Good thing I don't design bridges. But the result of that was that my perspective is a lot different than the CBC, for example, and I'm definitely not the left-wing mainstream media. So this conversation today here is based on a conversation I had with Premier Moe back in October when he was running to be Premier again. And it came about from this. In 2019, Moe, when he first became Premier, released a plan for Saskatchewan, a bunch of goals. What do we want to hit for 2030? How are we going to expand everything from potash to population and oil production? And one of those goals was by 2030, they wanted to see Saskatchewan oil production increase to 600,000 barrels per day. And as you see right there, some of these goals are already happening. We've already hit 1.25 million people. Our potash goals, we're getting there 5 years before that deadline. So I've been kind of harassing the Premier and the ministers that he's had for energy and resources. I'm not seeing a lot of concrete things happening for this goal of 600,000 barrels. Well, that's changed in the last couple of years. So, during my my election interview with the Premier, I said, what about this 600,000 barrel thing? And he said, well, Brian, I'd actually like to see us hit the million barrel club, referring to North Dakota, to our south. And I'm like, oh, really? He's like, yeah, I think, if we had enough federal changes, if they actually built pipelines like you talked about, if they actually got rid of the tanker ban and whatnot, we could actually hit 1 million barrels. So I grabbed onto that. I've been chewing on that bone, and I will not let go. Now, his minister, Colleen Young, has recently kind of started talking again about 600,000 barrels. But other ministers have been repeating after Moe, we're going to aim for 1 million. Now, what does that mean? In Alberta, Daniel Smith has been talking about doubling production, which would be enormous, being that you're bigger than most OPEC nations. Well, Saskatchewan, too, is pretty big, even though we're about 1/10 your size. Since 2001, Saskatchewan oil production has remained relatively flat around 450,000 barrel mark. There was a bump towards the end of the Bakken boom and at end of the 100-day oil, or $100 barrel oil. There was also a dip during the COVID-19 negative valuation. But generally speaking, for most of the last 2.5 decades, we have seen relatively flat oil production. Now, given that you have natural declines, maintaining a flat production is actually pretty decent. But this flat production has been despite advances in horizontal drilling, in multi-stage fracking, which we actually don't do as much as we used to. Drilling improvements such as PDC bits, which everyone's familiar with, drilling mud. Drilling rigs have really worked themselves out of a job. They're about twice as efficient now as they were 10 years ago, which is why we have half as many. And SAGD, which has come into a big way in northwest Saskatchewan. So this is what this looks like. This is from the Saskatchewan dashboard, which you can find on the Government Saskatchewan website. So that's starting at 2001 here. So flat, flat, flat. Bakken boom takes off. That's that's January of 15. That's the COVID dip. And then we're back to last month was 443. The month before that was 459,000 barrels. As you can see, relatively flat. So how the hell does the Premier say, well, we're going to double production? Now, I was told, I dug up all of my nice, wonderful pictures I had of seismic crews working in southeast Saskatchewan, that no one does this anymore. Jughounds are a thing of the past. Well, that shows how often you guys have been working here. I guess, sorry, the cable guys. So why am I pushing this 1 million barrel thing? If Saskatchewan gets anywhere close to this, the 600,000 barrels or 700 or even 1 million, that means a hell of a lot more work for everyone in the oil industry, including you. I want you to work. I want to see your trucks in Estevan. It's been a long time since I've seen these guys around. Or these. So if anyone does come down to Estevan and you're doing some work, give me a call. I'll come out, take a picture, write a story about you guys, okay? So where do we find, whose truck was that?
That truck's still in Estevan.
Is it? Yeah. Did someone steal it or what? So where do we find 550,000 barrels to get 1 million? The Multi-lateral well program, which was introduced in the budget of last year. A new program called the Low Productivity and Reactivation Oil Well Program. Lloydminster Thermals or SAGD. CO2 Enhanced Oil Recovery. And the Saskatchewan Oil Sands. What? Saskatchewan Oil Sands? We're going to get to that. So I talked to some of the provincial geologists. I said, give me a number of what would be a typical province-wide decline for oil production. Ballpark, and these are ballpark numbers, about 20% natural decline province-wide. Now that's multiple basins. That's Wilson Basin. That's the Lloydminster region. Call it 20%. So that's flat production. So the drop would be on a 20% decline would be roughly 90,000 barrels. Our typical drilling rig count during busy seasons is currently around 39, which means that for 39 rigs, that is how many rigs you need to keep flat production in Saskatchewan. So all things being equal, just to keep that treadmill going flat, you need 39. If you wanted to add, theoretically, 90,000 barrels, you would probably need an additional 39 rigs. Now you may say, well, where the hell are we going to get these rigs? And that's a good question because we cut up a lot of them in the last decade. But in 2012, we had 110 rigs working in Saskatchewan. So those rigs do exist. Some of them are still rusting. You know, you could probably patch them up a little bit, put some duct tape on them, put some new bearings in all the flattened bearings, maybe get them back to work. So I took the Minister of Energy and Resources about a year and a half ago for a little tour, and I had a nice little chat visit. I do this with a lot of politicians. I had another one just on Wednesday where I subject them to 3 to 7 hours of me talking about how to increase energy production in Saskatchewan. And I looked them in the eye and I said, you need to get more drilling rigs working in Saskatchewan because of the advent of multilateral wells. Now, we've been doing multi-leg wells forever. At least 15 years ago, Petrobakken used to do 2-leg wells as a standard. I'm not talking 2-leg wells. So he came out, this would be of February or March of last year, with the multilateral well program. And this program is volumetric in basis. There's different levels, which you can see on the right here. But basically what it works out to is that if you max out there's 2 designs. One is a pitchfork design, and one is a fishbone design. If you, for the fishbone, if you do maximum of or at least 10 legs, 200 meters each, or the pitchfork, you do 5 legs of 500 meters each, or longer for those, or more of that, you max out the program. And that here's the carrot. You do that, and you get your crown royalty reduced from around 17.5% on average to 2.5%. For the first 100,000 barrels that well produces. Now you do that on a $70 barrel when this budget came out, and you do the math, and that works out to about $1.5 million of royalties you do not have to give the province. That basically pays for the well, and then some. So, if you are not drilling multilaterals under this program, unless you're doing SAGD, unless you're doing specialized wells like CO2 injection, if you're not doing multilaterals in the next few years, you're an idiot. Because that $1.5 million that could be going into your pocket is going to the province for royalties. They are really, really giving away the farm here when it comes to reducing royalties. So here's some examples. I want to thank Chinook Geosteering. They provided all these graphics. So this is Sparky Wells in the Lloydminster area. You'll see on the bottom there some of your typical horizontals. Now you start seeing the fan type design of the fishbone. And here's some pitchfork design. Okay, there's our 2.5% I was talking about. That's me saying you're an idiot if you don't do this. Now, this is really important on northwest Saskatchewan because CHOP's cold heavy oil production of sand, which was a standard way of producing oil in the Lloydminster region from the 80s until about 10 years ago, relied on a lot of sand coming out of the well, up to a 30% sand cut. I actually spent a year running an excavator in a sand pit near Baldwinton, Saskatchewan. If you want to know where the BSE crisis started, it was in Baldwinton. And one of the CEOs of Lycos Energy told me that by doing wells like these, by having so much exposure to the reservoir, you reduce the pore pressure, which means none of the sand comes out. So instead of dealing with the very expensive sand that has been a headache for decades, you basically forego that and just produce essentially clean oil coming out of these heavy oil wells. So when I was at the Lloydminster Oil Show last September, there were 5 rigs within 10 miles of Lloydminster drilling in the CHOPS area that had pretty much been entirely dead, all drilling these type of multilaterals because guess what? You can now produce heavy oil without sand. Totally revolutionary. So this is some examples near Cummings and Waseca, pitchfork and fan designs, as you can see here. Now these are Lycos wells. So this is Britannia. This is just outside of Lloydminster. This is the 3D presentation, and this is the plan view. Those sort of wells are going to totally open up the Lloydminster patch that it hasn't seen for a while. And it also means that you don't have to bring a third of $1 billion check to set up a or an oil facility in northwest Saskatchewan now. That means smaller companies can get involved. This right here is a stacked play. As you can see, the various formations there, and you can see the fans. Here's pitchforks, and then a fan above that. For 17 years, I've been writing about oil and gas in Saskatchewan. I've always been asking, what is the next big thing? This is it. The next program came out in this budget is the Low Productivity and Reactivation Oil Well Program. Say that 5 times. This one is not as ambitious as the multilateral one, but what it is it reinvigorates the idea of re-entries. You go in, you have to have a well that's producing less than 10.5 barrels per day, so it's basically done, and its future is to be a stripper well or be abandoned. You go into that well, and you drop another horizontal or 2. For each horizontal leg that you do, minimum 500 meters, you get to reduce your royalty for the first 3,000 cubic meters, or about 36,000 barrels, 37,000 barrels. You get to reduce it again to 2.5%. Saturn Oil and Gas, who I actually had the CEO on my podcast here, which just launched here this year, John Jeffrey talked about they were the company that actually was the lead one to suggest maybe you should do this, and they're doing it. So this is a chance to go into older wells, pop a few more horizontals in it, get more production out of what might otherwise be a dead area. So I forgot to mention, for the multilateral program, the province figures you can maybe get another 50,000 incremental barrels of production. This one here, they're looking at about another 30,000 barrels of incremental production. Third area. This is, I'm sure you're all familiar with the oil sands. Well, way down here in the Lloydminster area, this is essentially the oil sands, just deeper and a little bit higher API. So your heavy oil here down the Lloydminster, these are all used to be Husky, now they're Cenovus thermals. Husky originally planned to do 15 thermal projects before they were bought out and before COVID came and gave us all a bad day. They built 12. They're cookie cutter plants that are basically all essentially the same, most of them, and they're designed for 10,000 barrels per day. And that's pretty much what they got. So right now, the most recent presentation says they're getting 112,000 barrels out of their 12 plants. Now, a few of those are a few decades old or an older design, which is why they're not getting the full 10,000 barrels out of that. Take a look at the map here. So at various locations, like Dee Valley, that's one facility, but Rush Lake has 2 of them side by side. Spruce Lake has 3. These other ones here, Pikes Peak, that's the old one I was talking about. You notice there's about 10 miles between each one of them, and each one of them covers about 5 miles on the ground. There is a lot of room for interstitial drilling for additional stuff. They haven't said this. This is Brian speaking. I think they could probably develop another 10 facilities with the space and the land that they have. They have a lot of land up there. So if they did, Cenovus alone could add 100,000 barrels a day if they decide to pursue this, as opposed to spending money in other areas that they're doing, such as oil sands and offshore and that sort of stuff. So what does Saskatchewan have to do to Cenovus? I don't know, but maybe Moe should take John McKenzie golfing next week. Or I don't know where he has to do that, maybe somewhere real south or warm. So these are the thermal projects, as I said. So there is definitely room in northwest Saskatchewan to do more SAGD. And to prove that, this came from the Strathcona Resources. Now, I used to live in North Battleford for 10 years, but just north of North Battleford is Vaughan. This area right here, this is about 15 miles north of North Battleford. And this was first looked at about 20 years ago by a geologist named Steve Halbura, who's written many columns for me over the years. And a company called Ralliemont first did the workup on it, and now Strathcona has this. Strathcona has got a couple SAGD projects here at Meota West and Meota East, and another one at Vaughan. This is their production coming up. And this list here includes all the Cenovus ones. You can find this under Strathcona's most recent presentation. I flew my drone over their Meota 2 West facility. So we see the other pad here. Strathcona plans for expansions in 2025, expanding this facility, 6,000 barrels. Meota Central, this will be a new facility for 26, 12,000 barrels. Meota Central 2 for 29, another 12,000 barrels. Plover, which is down south, I think that's closer to Kerrobert area. That's a totally new one. Pilot will be 2,000 barrels initially, and then eventually another 16,000 barrels. Total growth by 2030 expected to be 48,000 barrels. One company. So when Premier's goal of hitting 100,000 barrels, people say, oh my God, how are you going to do that? This is one company, may account for 1/3 of that original goal of 600,000 barrels. Next one is CO2 enhanced oil recovery. Who here does the 4D seismic for the Weyburn unit on a regular basis? Show me your hand. So you guys? How often are you out there? Every couple of years or so?
Yeah, 1 to 2.
1 to 2. So CO2 has been done for enhanced oil recovery in Weyburn units since 2000. Weyburn and Mydale, but Weyburn's the big one. They haven't spent nearly as much money at the Mydale unit. This is what the graph looks like. The Weyburn unit is so old that if it were a human being, it would have collected its first CPP check a few years ago. It is now, I think, 67 years in production. So initially, it came on like wildfire. It's one of the biggest oil fields in Canada. Came down. And then this is infill drilling and horizontal drilling. And this here is CO2. The folks at Whitecap who bought it from Cenovus, this was originally Central Del Rio, which was part of Canadian Pacific. And all the way up to this here is the same company, different names. So it was Central Del Rio, then it was Pan-Canadian, then it was Encana, then it was Cenovus. All the same people, and then about 2017 or so, they sold it to Whitecap. It's really interesting because Whitecap is run by Grant Fagerheim, who's from Estevan. So having a Saskatchewan boy running it, I think, probably means a little bit more focus on what's happening in Saskatchewan. So the CO2 here, I've spoken to the people who run this facility. They tell me that as long as they have CO2, they're going to be producing oil for decades. My daughter is now a heavy-duty mechanic apprentice working for Jerry Minnell Limited in Weyburn, who's worked in this area for 65 years. I talked to the guy who ran the Weyburn unit for 25 years. I said, if she gets a job at Minnell's, and most of her work's in the Weyburn unit, how long can she have work? And he said, as long as they have CO2, she can do her entire career there. She turns 21 next week. So this incremental CO2 here, if you do some back-of-the-table napkin math, and I will admit I'm a little bit, positive on this, a little bit optimistic, but they're getting between the Boundary Dam Power Station with the coal-fired power plant 6 miles from my house, which I'll show you in a second here, and the Dakota gasification plant in Buell, North Dakota, they're getting about 2 million tons, 2.1 million tons per year. That gives them the incremental production of 10 to 20,000 barrels additional CO2, depending how you look at it. SaskPower is very, very seriously looking at rejuvenating its coal fleet. And Alberta here, Notley said, "Thou shalt not burn coal," and Smith did not stop them from shutting them down, and your last coal plant shut down in June of last year. In Saskatchewan, we've realized that as we build natural gas power plants, all that natural gas comes from Alberta, 90% of it, which means all the royalty, all the profit, everything that goes to Alberta companies and does not stay in Saskatchewan. But we own several hundred years of coal reserves, and because we the people of a nice socialist background, we the people own the coal, we the people own the power plants, so we burn the coal in, we the people supply the power through SaskPower to our people. We charge ourselves essentially nothing for the coal. The coal royalties last year collected by the province of Saskatchewan was $25 million, which for most people is a rounding error. That's to fuel 1/3 of our power generation. It's reduced now because of the carbon tax, but that's going to change soon. Well, in the last few years since I launched Pipeline Online, I've written over 100 stories talking about how wind and solar suck. I have written about how the fact that Alberta has doubled its wind generation and doubled its solar generation, and there have been numerous times, I've written over 100 stories where that wind has dropped to less than 2%, often less than 1% output, and occasionally down to zero. 4,800 megawatts is now 5,688 megawatts, dropping to zero power production. How do you run your economy on power that isn't there? Well, the government of Saskatchewan has taken notice, and the Minister of SaskPower told me a few months ago that because of my writing, they are changing this. If they rejuvenate the coal fleet, then we have the option of putting more carbon capture on it. So, if there's a market for it, if, I don't know, some of you guys maybe do some seismic in southeast Saskatchewan, figure out where they can put the CO2, and maybe Whitecap, maybe CNRL, maybe Saturn gets involved in this and wants to buy the CO2, hey, all of a sudden we can produce more oil. That's the Boundary Dam Power Station, which is 6 miles from my house. That's the carbon capture plant. In 2014, that cost $1 billion, plus another $600,000 to rejuvenate Unit 3 here. The minister is talking very seriously. Instead of shutting this down by federal statute, we are supposed to shut it down in 4 years, 7 months, and 7 days. Instead of that, they're going to rebuild 4, 5, 6. They're going to keep using Shand, which is down the road another 6 miles, and rebuild Poplar River, which is near Cornack, right on the border at south central Saskatchewan. If they put CO2 like this, and they add it onto these facilities, and they pipeline it to, for instance, this is the Weyburn unit. This is where all that CO2 is processed that goes from Boundary Dam. It's injected, they use it as what's called a water alternating gas, and the CO2 acts as a solvent. So they pump water, that's a water flood, then they put CO2, water, CO2, water, CO2. They've done over 90 patterns that do this. And the 4D guys, your job is to show up every few years and map where that CO2 is going to see how it's working. So with CO2, and that's the Shand Power Station. This one is the newest one in the fleet. So based on Boundary Dam 3, which is 150 megawatts, it produces about 800,000 tons of CO2 per year. It's supposed to be 1 million, but it's not perfect because it's first of kind. But based on that level, some table napkin math here is that if 2 million tons of CO2 per year going into Weyburn unit right now gives you about 20,000 barrels of incremental production. Maybe a little bit less than that, but we're being optimistic here. And then you added for units 4, 5, 6 is a 300 megawatts, so it's double the amount. Shand is 300. Poplar River 1 and 2 are 300, so each of those are 300. You do all the math, you could get, if you did everything including Poplar River, and that, I admit that's a stretch, possibly 8 million tons of CO2 per year. And by my math, that could give you potentially 80,000 barrels per day. Now this is, you may have noticed, each of these things as I go throughout the program here is more expensive. We're talking many billions of dollars to do this, to apply CO2. The province isn't talking about doing it yet. They're not going to do it without an oil company coming along and saying that we're going to buy that CO2. Okay? And whatever that market price is, that's going to have to pay for it. So if anyone here is from Whitecap, please buy it. The last part here is oil sands. Now, how many of you folks work in the Alberta oil sands? Like everyone? Yeah. Okay. Guess what? Us prairie chickens have oil sands too. That's due east of Fort McMurray. So the Athabasca oil sands do extend into Saskatchewan. It's part of the fact that's reason why Saskatchewan has 30 billion barrels of oil in reserves. Most of that in heavy oil, though, not oil sands. The Lloydminster heavy oil play is essentially the oil sands, but deeper and slightly higher API. But it's essentially the same thing. The problem is we have not figured out how to extract Saskatchewan oil sands. Now, they're too deep to mine and they're too shallow to SAGD. If you try to do SAGD, you're going to frack out because it's not enough cap rock, it's not deep enough. You're going to have stuff coming to the surface like happened at Christina Lake, and people get very upset about that sort of thing. Oil Sands Quest tried mightily and failed. Axe Lake, which was their project there, was 55 kilometers east of Fort McMurray. So, some of you may know your history. I actually met a guy who worked on this. I never heard about it until a few years ago. He actually worked in this little part right here. That is an underground mine the Alberta government built in the mid-'80s, early 80s. It's called the Alberta Underground Test Facility. It was built near Fort McMurray, and it cost $24 million, something like that. Don't quote me on that number there. This is before horizontal drilling was mastered. So they actually dug an underground cavern, a few hundred meters deep, about a kilometer long, 2 shafts going down to it, and then they drilled up into the McMurray Formation and drilled a couple hundred meters to prove out SAGD. This bet the Alberta government took, which I'm sure everyone then said, oh my God, how stupid are you to spend money on this, is what pioneered SAGD, which now in situ production accounts for over half of oil production in Canada, 1/3 of Saskatchewan oil production. If Alberta had not taken that bet, half of you people probably wouldn't have a job here today, maybe less. So we have in Saskatchewan the Petroleum Technology Research Centre, and the PTRC was founded 25 years ago when Liberal Cabinet Minister Ralph Goodale and NDP Cabinet Minister from Saskatchewan, Eldon Laudermilk, were having a smoke in Central Asia, and I think it was a gold mine, and he said, you know, we've got 30 billion barrels of oil in Saskatchewan, we need to figure out how to get it out, because it's mostly heavy oil, and we don't really know what the hell to do with it. So they formed the PTRC to do that. And they've done work, they've done a lot of work with the CO2 stuff in Weyburn. I'm sure you're familiar with there, sir. They basically wrote the book on geological storage for CO2, and they've done some work in Northwest Saskatchewan. But here's the problem. The current funding from the government of Saskatchewan is $1.5 million per year. Now, how much did I say that the government is willing to forego for royalties for one individual well that's multilateral? 1.5. So I had a nice little chat with the minister responsible for the PTRC saying, if you're willing to forego that for one well, why the hell don't you add a 0 or 2 to the PTRC's budget and do what, how do you pronounce it? Eostra? I can never pronounce it. Do what Alberta did, take a bet on our oil sands, because if the private industry isn't going to do it, and it's our vested interest to create an oil sands industry, the province needs to step up and do it. And they need to pour some money into the research and figure out maybe they need to do polymer, maybe they need to do a different type of thermal. Maybe there's something to be done. But because Alberta took that bet, and you guys all have work because of it, maybe Saskatchewan needs to get off its ass and do the same thing. So as I said, add a 0 or 2. And the minister, Warren Kading's like, well, I can't do that easily. I'm like, well, do you want to pay for hospitals? The Premier just said in his campaign or election night speech, we're going to try to provide a doctor for every person in Saskatchewan, which is a real big problem. I lost my doctor last week because he said after 79 years he's going to retire. So if we're going to have money to do things like hospitals and schools and teachers and all the other wonderful things, we need income. And if you ask the average person on a street, what is Saskatchewan's #1 contributor to GDP, what would you say?
Grain.
Grain, agriculture, right? Or what would the other option be? What would you think? Potash, right? Folks, it's oil. It's the oil that you find and we pump. Oil is #1. We are not going to pay for more hospitals and doctors and nurses if we try to enhance our tourism industry. We're sure as hell not going to do it with canola with 100% tariffs. And they're building 2 new canola crushing plants within a stone's throw, quite literally, of my mother's place. We cannot expand our economy easily doing any of those other things, but we can grow oil production if we put an effort into it. How are we going to do it? Some of you folks might be familiar, especially the geophysicists here. You might have talked to the folks here at the Saskatchewan Geophysical Laboratory, also called the Core Lab. Where will the next big thing be found for resources and reserves? It's by smart geologists taking a look at this core. The huge repository in Regina has been there for 60-some years now. And every research geologist the province has pet projects where they're working on, because every nerd likes to work on some little thing like that. I have told ministers and the Premier, you walk in there and you say, whatever you want to do, what's your budget, and I'll double it. You want to increase oil production? You give those real smart people there, give them a little bit of money, and they don't get much. It's measured in hundreds of thousands. 2 examples. Who here has worked in Saskatchewan helium? You're helium? Okay. Melinda Yurkowski has been working on helium for a few decades now. A large part of the Saskatchewan helium industry, which now has 9 processing facilities, is based on her work. We will have commercial lithium production likely by December, 20 miles west of Esfand with Arizona Lithium. Before the guys in Alberta, by the way, haha. We are going to be the first at the plate of Canadian brine lithium production. That's entirely based on the research work of a senior geologist, Gavin Jensen, at Saskatchewan Subsurface Geological Laboratory, Saskatchewan Geological Survey. If the province pours some money into these eggheads so they can actually go find things, we will make money. We have 2 brand new industries, helium, which is kind of resurrection, one from the 70s, and lithium, because of the work of these people. And the province has the purse strings to do this. So, where do we find that 50,000 barrels? 50,000 barrels from multilaterals, 30,000 from low productivity program. SAGD, Strathcona is already talking ballpark 50,000. I think Cenovus could probably come up with 100,000 if they tried. Maybe another 80,000 in CO2 enhanced oil recovery in southeast Saskatchewan. And what can we get from oil sands if we actually figure it out? Could we get $250,000 out of that? If we do, there's 1,000,000 barrels. So Saskatchewan can increase its oil production if there's a will to do so. The multilateral program and the reactivation program are showing initial promise. Every winter season, I jump in my truck with my kid and we drive around and take pictures of every rig we can find. So I have a bunch of file pictures for stories. Half the rigs we visited last, I guess it'd be February, were drilling multilaterals within 20 miles of Esfand. Strathcona is very serious about increasing its SAGD up in North Battleford area. The government should pay for the foundational research to actually get things going so that industry can take off, because industry is more focused on the quarter. We need to focus on the quarter century. If we have any success at all in achieving either the 600,000 barrels or the 1,000,000 barrel goal, it will result in a lot of additional work for CAGC members and everyone else in the industry. And that's why I'm writing about this stuff basically every day now. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Pipeline capacity.
Well, that's a big thing. So I actually talked to the minister about this because Minister Colleen Young, because a few months ago, Daniel Smith said she's talking to Enbridge and TransCanada and South Bow about increasing export capacity. And I said, you better get in there before to get it all figured out with us left behind. There's actually a bit of a kerfuffle in Weyburn. Enbridge, of all people, wants to build a $500 million plus wind facility beside Weyburn because, I don't know, they want to be green or something like that. And some people there are really pissing in their cornflakes and trying to make a big deal out of it. And I said I'm not a big fan of wind, but if someone shows up with $500 million they want to spend in your town, take their goddamn money. Okay? Especially because my kid could be one of the people working on this, quite literally. And I pointed out to the Sask Power Minister and other people, if there's one company you don't want to piss off, you know, if you want Energy de France, all these other wind companies, who cares? It's not Enbridge, because we need Enbridge on board. So when we say we want, or we're going to need a million barrels of pipeline capacity or more, we don't want them to say, oh, we got 16 projects on the go and you're number 28 in our priority list. So Enbridge is absolutely crucial for that. But the reality is that if we want to ship anywhere other than the US, we need to talk Energy East, and that's a whole other half-hour discussion. Questions? Anyone else?
Who are you going to sell it?
Who are we going to sell it to? That's it. Energy East. Sell it to the east. Saskatchewan oil is never going to go west. We need to go east or we need to go south. And some people are talking Churchill. I'm questionable about that. My stepdad worked as a tugboat hand in Churchill in the 70s. I got varying opinions about how practical Churchill is. But we need to go east. We need to build Energy East, and we need to do it yesterday. It was supposed to be in service December of 2018. Imagine where we'd be if we had built that damn thing by then.
All right, Brian.
Thank you very much.